This is our outdoor garden here in Zone 5, Wisconsin. A little cold out there. Inside, we have our own little oasis. And one of the things we try to do here on this channel is to experiment, trial and error, just try to find our way around some of the difficulties that having a small growing space might lend itself to. And one of the things we've tried this year for the first time is to grow some beans indoors in a container. And we've been more successful now, I think, than we were even growing them outside. So today we're going to harvest some beans and talk a little bit about the process of growing them indoors, and I'm going to show you how we planted them. Let's go. Now, the beans I'm going to show you today are Purple Teepee beans, and we got these from Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds. And they're supposed to be, if you look at the back here, they're supposed to be bush beans, which is kind of interesting because if you look at our beans here today, they don't look very much like bush beans. And when we grew them outside, they were definitely bush beans. So I don't know what that's all about, but what I do know is that they have been incredibly productive for us inside. We planted these almost exactly 60 days ago. And these beans are supposed to be a 60 days to maturity bush bean. And so we're right on schedule, which is kind of interesting because sometimes when you grow indoors, the timing, the days to maturity can be a little bit longer. The lights that these beans have been growing under the whole time is this 2000 watt Morsen full spectrum grow light. And we've talked about this in an earlier video where we showed you all the different lights that we have in here. This is an older light. It's about 3 or 4 years old. And so it's not the newest technology, but these beans clearly don't know that. These beans have been happily and healthily growing inside this grow bag in a soilless potting mix that I'm going to show you here in just a little bit. And we are seeing plenty of production out of these. One of the things I love about these beans, I mean, they're a beautiful color, but these tend to be really nice and tender. We harvest them somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 to 5 inches long, just like these right here. They don't get tough, they don't taste woody, and maybe you didn't know this, but when you cook purple beans, they turn green again. And purple beans also start out green, as you can see from some of these baby beans that have yet to fully develop. But they are a quick producer. This particular variety is a fantastic producer. You can see it throughout here. We've got beans on top of beans. And as you can see from some of this time-lapse footage, they grow quickly. Once the beans themselves start to develop, they really develop quickly. One of the things that makes this bean a perfect candidate for attempting to grow it indoors is that the flowers are what we call perfect flowers. And all that means is that there's both the pistil and the stamen, the male and female reproductive organs, in each of these flowers. So we don't need to worry about our lack of pollinators indoors. This will grow just fine without any assistance, and we don't even have to hand pollinate. One of the other questions I think you might have when it comes to putting something like this indoors is just how much care you have to take or how much care is required. And these beans are really simple. Besides providing an unexpected trellis, again, we thought these were going to be bush beans, which involves just a simple string. That's all it is, a string that they can climb up, and they are really good at finding their way and winding their way around the string. We didn't have to do any winding. Besides that, and an occasional watering to make sure the soil didn't dry out, that's all we did. It was a set it and forget it kind of situation beyond that. So easy to take care of, easy to grow, and now perfect to harvest. It doesn't really matter what variety of vegetable I'm growing. When it comes time to harvest and I'm not planning to just pull the vegetable out like a kohlrabi, I want to make sure that I take as much care as possible to do as little damage as possible. Now, I know a lot of people just pull these beans off and they're just fine. The plants are just fine. But because we're growing this up a little piece of string, I'm afraid if I just pull on this, I'm going to really damage the plant, and I don't want to do that. So I'm just going to come in here and clip each of these beans off. And one of the reasons I want to be so careful is, as I harvest these beans, and these are the perfect size, these are going to be so good. As I harvest these beans, I'm going to expect far more beans to be appearing on here in the future. This is not one of those harvests where it's one and done. We should expect some really vigorous growth out of these beans, especially once we start harvesting. Now, you've probably heard before that the more you cut your hair, the faster it will grow back. And unfortunately, that is a myth. That's not true. But what is true is that if you cut back your beans, if you harvest your beans frequently, the plant itself will produce more of them and will produce them faster. If you don't harvest your beans quickly, or you don't harvest your beans regularly, that's not going to work well for you, because you're going to find that your plant will actually go dormant and you will stop producing. So if you want bigger bean harvests, if you want bigger crops of beans, you need to harvest regularly once they get to the size that's going to work for you. And this is the perfect size for us. I'm going to go ahead and harvest the rest of this lot of beans, and then I'm going to show you how we plant them. Oh, one more thing. When you're harvesting beans, it's important to look around underneath the plant. Otherwise, you might miss a few, because they're pretty good at camouflage. Well, how about that? That's not too bad for just a couple of bean plants in our first harvest. And there's going to be plenty more where that came from. Now, planting these beans is super simple. We've been using a soilless potting mix for all of our vegetables this year. The base of this mix is peat moss and some Pro Mix organic soilless potting mix. And on top of that, we've added some vermiculite. And if you have worm castings, well, you can't go wrong adding some worm castings as well. We'll then amend it when all is said and done so that there's plenty of food in there for the beans that we're planting. Then we need a medium-sized pot, I would say 2 gallons plus, or a grow bag around that size, just so we have enough room at the top so we can give spacing to grow enough bean plants to make it worth our time. And I'm going to go ahead and fill this up with our soilless mix. Now, prior to planting, you can amend the soil as you'd like. We're going to add some azomite, some bone meal, and some organic general fertilizer to ours, and then we'll plant the beans. All right, everything's measured out, so we're just going to mix all the fertilizer, azomite, and our bone meal into the soilless mix. And now I'm going to press down the surface just a little bit, and then we're going to plant our beans. Well, we've had a great deal of success with the germination rates of the beans that we get from Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds, so I don't think we're going to have any problem getting these particular seeds to germinate. And I'm going to go ahead and plant 5 in here. Typically, beans need about 4 inches of space. So what I'm going to do is I'm giving them a little bit less than that, but I think they'll do fine. I've dug holes that are about a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch deep, and that's the recommended depth, between a 1/2 inch and an inch. I'm just going to cover them lightly. The bigger the seed, typically the deeper that you plant them, because they have more energy to break through that surface. And that's it. It really is as simple as that. We're going to take these, put them over underneath the grow light, and in 60 days we should see that this turns into a whole lot of these. And that is exciting. We hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, don't forget to give us a like, leave us a comment, remember to share and subscribe, and most importantly, remember, when you're with us, you are good to grow.